you read the book by Judge Anthony Napolitano called The Constitution in Exile, you'll find out that not one federal law was ruled unconstitutional by the Supreme Court between 1937 and 1995. The Supreme Court is a rubber stamp operation. There are a few exceptions now and again, but it's basically a rubber stamp operation for the relentless, unending, unconstitutional growth of the state. I even wrote about this in one of my books, Hamilton's Curse. Lawyers, constitutional lawyers, talk about the Hamiltonian interpretation of the Constitution. And what this is Hamilton himself invented the phrase implied powers of the Constitution. So we have 200 years of case law where Hamiltonian lawyers have twisted the words of the Constitution so that it no longer in the courts has any strength to speak of to limit government. It always is used to enhance government. And so this would be laughed at, a lawsuit saying, of course, the Constitution, they've got 200 years of case law that they could use to easily not even take the case on. That's why, we really are. I wasn't kidding when I said we live in a regime of unlimited government. Now, we're moving, I would not be surprised if communism in Cuba was gone altogether in 5 or 6 years. I would not be shocked at all. But at the same time, we're moving in that direction. We're moving in the direction of socialism. We have a proud Marxist in the White House. How much more forceful could we go in that direction?
Question?
Hi, my name is Peter Santamaria. I'm also part of the Ron Paul campaign grassroots activist down here in Miami. My question is, as a member of the Republican Executive Committee here, I often get the comment, well, good luck to Ron Paul, but at the end of the day, we must support whoever the Republican is. It's a very collective board mind statement, and I often ask people, well, do you remember George W. Bush? Because if you get upset at Barack Obama's policies of increased spending, out the nose, imperialism, eroded civil liberties, well then why do you remember Bush nostalgically? So my question is, during this primary season, how would you recommend that we go about saying it's not just anybody but Obama, but instead look with a scrutinizing eye at these candidates so that you avoid the same policies that, remember, started the bank bailout under Bush, right? Based on some of Clinton's ideas. So that's my question, is how do we point that out to some of the party now that there is, no difference between, the left and right wing of the same bird of prey?
Yeah, well, there isn't, except for Ron Paul. He's the only one who's generally different, generally believes in limited constitutional government. The rest of them are all part of the establishment. Look who has endorsed Romney. Bob Dole, Sean McCain. Aren't they proven losers? But yeah, I think you have to understand that there are a lot of people that look at politics like they look at the Florida State football game. All that matters is my team wins, period, end of story. And they don't want to spend 2 minutes more thinking about anything else. So I think you have to focus on the people who at least are willing to listen to why it's a better idea to live under freedom than it is to live under tyranny. And of course, government has always been the main source of tyranny in any society that has suffered from tyranny. And educate yourself, like Ron did when he was a young man, and do your best. But I think there's just a segment of the population very big. It really does look at this as a recreational thing. And even the argument, you might have noticed they never asked Gingrich or Santorum, will you support the candidate? It's only Ron Paul who's been elected 12 times and who was able to raise $6 million in one day from strangers and small donations. Spontaneously. He's unelectable, but Romney is because he has the owner of the Dolphins owner is holding a big fundraiser for him in Palm Beach. Is that who it is? Yeah, that's where he gets his money, $10 million at a time from 10 people, and he's supposed to be electable. And they probably won't even vote for him. And so I get to concentrate on people who you think have a light on upstairs, and do your best.
Question. Hello. Hello. saying about you. I don't know, this is inspiring a little bit, but anyway, before I ask the question, I want to say that all of us should know. Obama, people believe that it's very hard to beat. That's the biggest lie there is. I don't agree with Ron Paul, but I think Ron Paul can beat Obama without any problem. I only think there is one that among the Republicans that won't be able to beat him, but that's not Ron Paul. But anyway, that's beside the point. And I base what I believe in the Rasmussen polls. I follow the Rasmussen polls daily. And the difference between the people that are full in force for Obama is only 20%, and the people that are totally against Obama is 40%, and this being steady for more than 2 years. So it will be very difficult to Obama to overcome this. But anyway, going back to Ron Paul, I will not vote for Ron. And the reason I will not vote for him is have nothing to do with the economics. As far as I am concerned, he's the best on the economics. I have read his book on the Federal Reserve, and I have learned a lot about him. I like a lot. But there is one thing that will stop me from voting for him, and it has to do with Iran. I think it's total suicidal, his policy. It will force us to have Geiger counters in our homes, because it will invite nuclear war. And that's the reason that I think the man cannot be president of the United States.
He also has no plans to invade Mars either. I said he also does not plan to invade Mars either, as well as Iran. Well, let's try to introduce some common sense into this hysteria on Iran. Listen to what will Romney and Santorum and Gingrich say? They say, if Iran gets a nuclear weapon, they will nuke Israel. That's what they've said. I've heard them say that on television. Israel has hundreds of nuclear weapons. We have hundreds, probably thousands of nuclear weapons. So if the Iranian politicians, as crazy as they sound, really wanted to nuke anybody like that, they know that they personally and millions of their fellow Muslims would be incinerated by the Israelis and by us.
They don't care.
What would Allah think of a Muslim politician who's responsible for killing millions of Muslims? It just doesn't make any sense at all that they would pose a threat. We did contain the Soviet Union with their thousands of nuclear missiles. The idea that we should be afraid of Iran, which doesn't even have a nuclear missile, I think is just plain ridiculous. It's just plain ridiculous. It's war propaganda, just like the propaganda that led up to the Iraq War, which we all know was a big lie, wasn't it? Even the CIA every one of those soldiers who died in Iraq died in vain.
Right.
It was based all on a lie. Weapons of mass destruction were never there. The CIA even admits it now.
Question on that.
Hey, what's this, a debate between you and this man? Say it again, say it.
What is going on with the troops that have been moved to Australia?
What is going on?
Well, they're gonna
Is
take
that
China.
another country war? What is the actual purpose of their troops?
Her question was,
Thank you for her service.
I'm not an expert at this. She wants to mention that Obama has sent troops to Australia and Central Africa. Well, as I said, American presidents think that our goal should be world domination, kind of like the Soviet Union thought 30 years ago. Ron Paul certainly would not only end that nonsense, but he would bring most of the troops home so that they could defend America and not Central Africa or Australia. The only rationale I've read in the newspapers about troops in Australia is that there are some American corporations who are afraid they might have trouble doing business in that part of the world and competing with the Chinese. And they somehow want the U.S. military to someday force people in that part of the world to do business with them and not with Chinese business people. But again, that's another form of corporate welfare. The military is being used to make money from corporations, not to defend Americans. And it's an atrocity. To have young men and women join the military for that reason, there should be a revolution in this country over that sort of thing.
Right.
My name is Elsa. I'm a Tea Party activist. I like Ron Paul, but he scares me because the international policy for me is to work. Another way, I like him, but I'm scared of you about him.
I didn't catch why you were scared.
I'm scared because he thinks that he's going to live in the bubble. And we have to be aware that we have enemies here. So I would like to vote for him if he was a little bit more flexible with international policy.
So you think he's an isolationist? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, yes.
Okay, well, like I said, Ron's fourth defense policy would be to use the military to defend America. And I think you have to come into the realization that our poking our noses in everyone else's business, decade after decade after decade, has created a lot of enemies for Americans. There was a book written 20 years ago called Endless Enemies by a man named Jonathan Quintney about, like Ron Paul has said, imagine if the Chinese put some of their aircraft carriers in the Gulf of Mexico and had military operations and lobbed a few missiles into Louisiana or Florida or someplace like that. Don't you think we would get a little ticked off at that? That's what we do all around the world. Use the military to defend Americans, not to poke your noses in everyone else's business, usually for the benefit of the financial benefactors, corporate financial benefactors of both Republicans and Democrats. That's usually the reason. Let me give you one anecdote to explain this. You remember when we were involved in Bosnia, that part of the world in Europe, under the Clinton administration? For weeks and weeks I read in the paper that even the Marines couldn't get around. They were stuck, they couldn't move, they were in a quagmire. And then all of a sudden there's an article in the New York Times about the Commerce Secretary, Ron Brown, taking an airplane full of corporate executives on a shopping trip right there, where supposedly even the Marines couldn't get a helicopter up. And what were they doing? They were bidding on sewerage contracts and road building contracts. So the whole purpose of that enterprise, what did we do? We blew the place up, and then we brought all the corporate fat cat financiers of the Democratic Party in to give them contracts to rebuild the place. And fortunately, I don't think any American soldiers died in that thing. They could have. Their planes could have been shot down. That has to come to an end, that sort of thing. Ron Paul is in favor of using the military to defend us, not to make money for whoever wants to fund the careers of these losers in power.
Hi, my name is Murray Saban. I'm a resident of the state of New Jersey, and 4 years ago I had the privilege of representing Ron Paul at presidential forums throughout the state. Well, I also was a candidate for United States Senate at the time. Needless to say, I didn't make it, but times certainly have changed since 4 years ago.
Tell them who you lost to.
I lost to a former congressman who basically didn't run a campaign against one of the most left-wing, wealthy businessmen, former businessmen in the U.S. Senate, Frank Lautenberg, who was probably the most anti-gun advocate in the United States Senate. But anyway, I was hoping there would be other surrogates here tonight so I could ask one of them a question, but since they're not here, Tom, you can comment on the question I was going to ask someone who would represent Mitt Romney. Two signature issues have made Mitt Romney's campaign. One, he's opposed to Obamacare because it's a federal mandate, and since he only believes in state mandates, he doesn't believe that the federal government should have federal mandates. So my question to that individual would be that you could comment on which federal mandates besides Obamacare would Mitt Romney abolish if he were president of the United States, like Social Security, Medicare Part A, drug prescription, federal aid to education, and all the other federal mandates that are a mile long that he probably has no objection to. So that would be one question. So I have the microphone. You were interrupted, So please be civil of the community. And the other question is, Mitt Romney says he would be a great president because he has all this private business experience and he knows how to create jobs. So my question to that individual would be, and you can comment, Tom, is if he knows how to create jobs, and you know that the government doesn't create jobs, why do you want to be president of the United States? Since the government doesn't create jobs but destroys jobs, why don't you stay in the private sector and do some good for the economy and continue working at Bain Capital? So that would be my question.
That was a rhetorical question.
Okay, question over here.
Was it Payne Capital? Is that the name of his company? Payne Capital?
Bane of our existence.
Cesar Castillo, and thanks so much for giving to learn more about Paul.
Can you hear me now? Let me say the following, if you don't mind, please. One specific question that I have, and I'm very concerned about this, and as a matter of fact, I'm not a Cuban American, but I feel like one of them. I'm very concerned about Mr. Ron Paul stating that he is against the embargo. Right. Against the embargo that we have right now. As a matter of fact, if Mr. Ron Paul is against the embargo, I will not vote for him.
Because if you remember, the Cuban people have been suffering for almost 53 years. And so far, the embargo is one of the very few, let's say, arms that were used against the country.
Well, the embargo, of course, according to what you just said, has been a total and complete failure, hasn't it? Castro is still there. You know, there was an even bigger embargo, you know, on South Africa before, during apartheid, but it was very easily gotten around because country after country would simply put the flag of another country on their ships and ship stuff into South Africa.
But sir, that doesn't mean that because he hasn't been working on the different administrations. Now, Mr. Ron Paul is saying right away, even before becoming president, even before winning the primary, he's saying that he's against the embargo. So therefore, if that is the case, if that is the case, that he will not come with my vote. And I don't want to talk for anybody else, but I'm sure many of the Cuban Americans that are right here will not vote for him.
Guys, intern, please. Intern, guys. Intern, please. Intern.
Well, the embargo has been a symbolic thing, but it hasn't been effective because Canada can trade with Cuba.
Question over here.
Countries can trade, so all it does is make a statement, which is nothing wrong with making a statement.
Mr. DiLorenzo.
Where's that voice?
I'm over here. Great job so far. Thank you very much for your wise words. My name is Alex Jimenez. I've lived all my life in Miami. I'm visiting right now from out of state. I support Ron Paul in the state I live in right now, but I'm here visiting. And I'm the former college Republican president at FIU back in 1983. And so my credentials, and I'd like to make a statement with your permission. I'm going to talk about my credentials as a former neocon. As a former neocon, and then I'm going to ask you a question. If that's okay.
As long as you get to a question.
I'll keep it moving. My credentials as an anti-communist in the 1980s is probably without question. My family had to come from Cuba, just like probably everyone else's family here in Miami, sitting in this room, because of Fidel Castro, Raul Castro, Che Guevara, Camilo Cienfuegos, and all the people who took over Cuba by force and deprived everybody of their constitutional liberties. And so fighting the left and fighting the communists is second nature to me. And so if any neocon in the room would like to call me a communist or a lefty or a pinko, they're going to fail. I actually had the pleasure of stopping Vladimir Posner, who worked for Novosti News Agency, from coming to FIU using student government money. I was in the Miami Herald opposing him, and he had to cancel his trip. So it was my pleasure to shut him down. So here's my question, or here's my statement, and then I'll follow up with a question. I think there's more than going on in just Iran look at who's been arming Iran since 1998 at least, documented both by AIPAC and by the United States government and various government intelligence agencies around the world, we'll find that most of Iran's armaments are Russian and Chinese. We'll find that most of the Middle East's weapons are Russian and Chinese. So the question I have is, if we look at all the pieces on the plane, on the chessboard, as Dmitry Brzezinski suggests that we do in the grand chessboard that he wrote in 2004, why are we looking at the other pieces on the board? Why aren't we looking at the interests that are on the board from all the superpowers that are playing this game? Why aren't we talking about sanctions against China? How come we're not talking about sanctions against Russia? How come we're not talking about the big picture and just frame it as something between Iran and Israel?
That's an easy one. China and Russia can shoot back.
What? And by the way,
that's why we pick on tiny little countries like Iran.
I do think Iran is a threat, and I do think Israel could be in danger. I do agree with that, but there's more than meets the eye.
And why are Americans, should Americans be involved in this? Why is it our business to be involved in every conflict around the world?
That question should be
Why should Americans die for any other country but their own?
Let me just tell you, that question should be answered within the context of the bigger picture I just drew.
Well, the bigger picture, that bigger picture is what has gotten us into trouble and has given us 135 military bases around the world, bankrupted the country, it's a huge debt. That's our problem, is that the politicians in Washington are big picture guys like the neocons.
And I am voting for Ron Paul.
Question vote.
Hi, my name's Marty. I know I come across a little passionate.
It's fine.
This is my situation. I don't necessarily agree with this policy, this foreign policy. I think we should help Israel and our allies, as we should help England and all our allies around the world. We have an obligation to help them because when the time comes, they may need to help us. So I do believe that his foreign policy is weak, but that's neither here nor there. What's he all about when it comes to education, the education of my children? What's Ron Paul going to do to facilitate that for my kids? Because right now, I have a daughter in high school in the public system, the public school system, that dumbs down our children every single day. They don't want there to be a big discrepancy between the lower income, the middle income, and the higher income. So let's make everybody stupid and everybody's equal across the board. What is Ron Paul going to do? In the Department of Education, get rid of it. What's he going to do?
Get rid of it. Get rid of it.
Well, we got in. One reason for the mess we're in is more and more centralized control